is anniversary of September 11th?
Which September 11th? The anniversary is September 11th. Which September the 11th?
It's the World Trade Center, the bomb blast.
Yeah,
USA,
but there is another September the 11th.
First year in Coptic year. First day in Coptic year.
This was the paper sheet there.
For which
Egypt,
Oh, for Egypt's New Year.
Egyptian, ancient Egyptian New Year.
What happened in ancient Egypt? September the 11th?
The 11th September is the first day in the new year of
Is it?
Coptic year.
Okay.
Coptic year.
Ah, right.
What is the
Let's not get too dominated by the American view of the world. Seriously, 3,000 people died. That's a terrible thing, sure. But, you know, there's been lots of other bombings and attacks where lots of other people have died, haven't we? And do we stop and remember them? We probably should remember them all. But if we're not going to, why remember this one particularly? It helps reinforce the American view of the world, and ultimately that justified a whole series of things since 2001 that have been conducted in the Middle East, which have been, you know, pretty devastating and killed far more people. 1 million people dead in Iraq. And, you know, the claim was that, yeah, we need to go into Iraq because of September the 11th. But there was no link whatsoever. There were claims of weapons of mass destruction. No evidence of that claim. You know, and so unsubstantiated claims with no evidence. Yeah, but they're very expensive. 1 million people gone. We've got 3,000 dead in this case, and I'm not saying that those 3,000 people don't matter at all. They do. Every single person does. But, you know, this is what we get with the media, isn't it? The focus on America, 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 and every time we watch this stuff, we get more absorbed into the American view. If we drew a map...
So this is why this is helpful, because it lets you critical analyze the content.
Yep.
For example, we don't look things at an American point of view. We look things at our point of view. So,
Yes.
Because pretty much America, they think that they're the best nation or they're the best people. That's a bit like kind of like being up yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying this from my opinion. I actually seen documentary people say that, oh, we're the best nations or we're more accepting and stuff like that. I've seen videos and yeah.
Yep. Absolutely, I'm just trying to draw a map of the world, which is really bad, and it's purposely bad.
Africa, Asia, America.
Now, okay, we live in Australia, so... Right, there's Australia. I mean, that's the world. I'm drawing it really badly. That's the world according to the dominant media. Where, you know, 3,000 dead, yeah, sure. It's probably bigger than that, isn't it? I should probably draw the United States about this big. News, news, news. Even the ABC is like this. Africa, there's Africa. How much news do you get from Africa? When there's a famine or a natural disaster, you get a bit... Okay, there's been a civil war in the Congo. The Congo. How many people have died in the Congo since the year 2000? It's over 6 million people have died. Who's heard of that? Who has heard of that? I mean, I've heard of that because I have a special interest in international affairs. But in other words, 6 million have died in the Congo. 3,000 there. Which gets remembered over and over again. This one doesn't even get talked about. If you don't believe me, go and Google it.
John,
You'll soon
do you think
see.
it's because the way they die or the way the happening?
These people, look, that was obviously very spectacular, wasn't it?
That's
You know,
right, yeah.
sure.
The way you can
Yeah,
see.
but it's not just that. I mean, there are
rain,
spectacular air disasters. It's got everything to do. That is the centre of empire in the world.
That's
These people dominate the production of information. There are 5 corporations which dominate 80% of the information on the planet in terms of media. They are American. Time Warner, Foxtel, da 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 da. I can't
It's
remember.
very, very biased. Fox News. They're very, very,
Very.
biased.
As I've said,
Very.
yeah, they
They're
are.
all known. They're
And
all
the
known.
survey has indicated, I've mentioned this before, 66% of information from Fox News is either totally false or partly false. So it's got a very poor,
And when,
very poor
and when you
reputation.
get them, they get really emotional. Because I remember someone
Yeah, very
got
emotional.
one of them, and she's like, I'll cut your mic if you keep talking. I'll cut it. And I'm like, you're not supposed to say that. You're a professional. You work in the news. You're supposed to, answer or handle it in a professional way. Not I'll cut you.
Sure.
Or how
Look,
dare you speak
Fox
to me.
News
Yeah.
is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is one of the main contributors to the Republican Party in the United States, and not just the mainstream Republican, the extreme right wing of the Republican Party. So he, gives a lot of money to the Republican Party, and those views of Fox News, which dominates the dominant media, global media, reflects the extreme right wing of the Republican Party. I mean, would you agree? That's about how big Latin America is. Certainly Europe is reasonably dominant. I mean, Australia is big for us because we live here. But India, how much news do we get? China, little tiny bit. It's not just because, we've got quite a few Indian and Chinese people living here. Middle East is a bit bigger, but Middle East it gets reported a lot, but almost all negative. This is a very, the worldview is created by the dominant class. I mean, it's a very important quotation. The dominant ideas of any epoch, period of history, are the ideas of its ruling class. I mean, the people who control the resources to make information, clearly, they're going to tend to shape the information, aren't they? So, I would suggest that the whole September the 11th thing is part of this dominant view. My first question was, which September the 11th? The original September the 11th happened, there was a disaster where 30,000 people got killed. 1973, on September the 11th, a really important political moment in 20th century history. Where was it? And this is what I mean. Most people are not aware of it, not your fault, but this dominates the media and therefore dominates our understanding of history as well. Okay, a little place here, Chile. Look up 1973, September the 11th. In 1970, Salvador Allende, the president, he was a socialist. He was elected to Chile. And they started, nationalising the big corporations. It's a big copper mining here. So Anaconda Copper, IT&T, these are American companies. They were beginning to be nationalised. Free health, free medicine, free schooling was spread across the population. The working class were kind of improving. Okay, the CIA and Henry Kissinger in particular said, right, this guy's got to be destroyed. So there was a whole 2 years, 3 years of campaigning against him. But on this day, September the 11th, 1973, there's very famous footage of the Americans organised the Chilean military to bomb the presidential palace. Allende was in there, he fought back, he was killed. 30,000 people were then collected, put in the national football stadium and tortured and killed. Now that was all conducted by the United States. It's just one example. I could go through all the different countries, just about of the US, and there are coups, 1964 Brazil, 1954 Guatemala, many in Colombia, 2002 Venezuela, just military takeovers organised by the United States against countries trying to get independent. Sorry, just one point.
Yeah.
Do you think the United States wants this to be remembered?
No.
Absolutely not. They want to put that one under the carpet, and they want to talk about what happened there.
John,
Yeah.
why would they do that to a country that's stable, a country that's going well, everyone is happy, to just destroy it and they don't have any competition?
Well, they're imperialists. It's capitalism. Capitalism has to expand, it has to accumulate, or if it doesn't accumulate, you don't get profit. It's part of it. So capitalism over time, where it develops, which countries are the big imperialists? Where capitalism developed first? Britain, US, France, Germany to some extent. It's not an accident that the countries which have had capitalism the longest have reached out around the world to try and get markets for products, but also cheap raw materials. It's part of the capitalist dynamic. But then it gets reflected in politics. The Monroe Doctrine in the 1840s. The Monroe Doctrine was this. During the 19th century, these guys are taking parts of the world. Africa, India, China, Germany, France, etc. Britain, carving up the world. The Americans said in the 1840s under President Monroe, hands off this bit. This bit is ours. That's our hemisphere. You're not going to go there to the Europeans. So ever since then, the US have had direct capitalist interests here, investments, for example, in Anaconda Copper Mine, in the telecommunications in Chile. They want cheap workforces. They want miners who have no unions, who are working for like $2 a day or less. That's great profits. Those profits go back to the centre, don't they? If you have a government that's left-wing and stands up for the unions and says, you guys should organise and you guys should have better pay and more rights and better conditions and greater safety in the mine, what do you think these guys are going to try and do? They've done it around the world.
Why would the military go against its own people? Because the president was doing good for the public was happy, and then the military, they betrayed the president. Like
the US and other imperialist forces have spent decades and centuries training up. I was watching a film just last night, it's a very famous French film, fiction. The US set up in Florida the School of the Americas. The School of the Americas was set up in the 1960s. It was designed to bring military and police from Latin America, train them up in advanced torture techniques, and send them back again. They trained up tens of thousands, I think it's 66,000, 70,000 police were trained up in 2 decades to go back to those countries, and most of that period they were dictatorships supported by or even caused or created by the US. And Google it, School of the Americas. And there are special handbooks of torture techniques, you know. It's very, very well documented.
What is it?
So in other words, the military, the imperialists trained up military, not just here, around the world. Indonesia, the Suharto dictatorship that killed 1 million people in 1965, that military takeover was organised by the Ford Foundation of the United States because they were worried about Sukarno and the left-wing independent nature of Sukarno, etc., etc. Go on and on. But,
What is the name of this movie?
the movie is called, the translation in, that's its translation in English. It was French, so it's L'État de Siège. It's French, it's Kostas, it's a Greek guy. Kostas Gravas was the director. He's Greek, but he made this French film, 1973. And the film was about this little country here, Uruguay, and there was a dictatorship there, and the people were resisting, and those people were called the Tupamaros. The Tupamaros got that name from a few centuries earlier, an Indian guy who resisted the Spanish was Tupamaro, and so they took his name because he was an independence fighter. And so it's about the Tupamaros fighting the dictatorship, but it's about how the United States trained up the police of that country and so on and so forth. It might be on YouTube, I don't know, but it's got English subtitles. Kind of strange because it's set there, but it's all in French. Those people don't speak French, they speak Spanish, but I don't know why they do that.
Can I ask some silly question?
Yeah, go for it. Sillier the better.
Are you related to Julian?
Julian Assange. Yeah, he's my half brother.
Exactly the way you sound. No,
Certainly, Julian and I, and lots of other people, you know. I mean, he's typical of the Australian left, so am I. I mean, there's several thousand of us.
Videos on.
Hey? Yeah, I know. I better send that to, better leave that one off YouTube.
Yes, no,
Yeah. Shall we do some pronunciation? Okay. All right.
Don't worry, just joking.
Now, what I've got here. Very important you know this stuff, I think. I mean, it's just, you know,
That's a part of a medical thing too.
it's just being, I don't know, history is really important stuff to know. And, you know, whose history, I guess, and what history. There's a lot, my point is there's a lot of silence, isn't there? There's a lot of dominant shouting, like September 11th, September 11th, September 11th. There's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of silence. Powerless groups, you know, how many Aboriginal people died
Come on,
in Australia?
John, to be fair, what I mean of 11 is not just that 3,000 people, it's the way they're very extreme to doing things like that. It's a sad, that part. That's how we describe it.
Well, again, that
Maybe-
word extreme, be careful. Word extreme, I'd say it's a little bit like our undesirable. You know, what's extreme?
Like you can see the plane, they hijack the plane and then
Yeah.
run into the building.
Sure.
You thought it's in the movie. You're not thinking it's in real.
Sure, it's
in life
spectacular.
like
It's
that.
spectacular, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we
But, you know,
big shot like this way.
Flying an F-111 over Iraq and dropping bombs on civilian populations and killing 1 million people,
Yeah,
that's extreme too.
yeah.
I mean, one's done in relative, you know, comfort, safety and high technology, and another is much more desperate and, you know, I mean, they're both extreme to me. Both seriously problematic. Okay, the twits. Well, what have I got this here for? Because I just wanted to revisit pronunciation, and we do know Roald Dahl, don't we? Remember George's Marvellous Medicine? Same writer. And very similar style, you'll soon see when we listen to a bit. But I think a number of people said, you know, we want to practice speaking, sure. Hopefully the sort of discussions you have of essay swapping or other topics, critical thinking, you have that time chatting, getting some speaking practice. But another element of speaking practice, I reckon, is just, you know, reading aloud and doing it a lot and doing it regularly. I mean, I noticed just last Tuesday in the private group, people reading a more difficult piece of English. There's just not a lot of fluency necessarily. And you've probably done a lot of reading, but how much reading aloud have you done? You know? And just getting your tongue around words easily and smoothly and kind of automatically. It's not easy. It takes weeks and it takes months. But if you don't practice it, you kind of never get there. Obviously, as good English speakers, again, in professional life, somebody says, oh, can you read the report for the meeting, please? You just get up there, you want to just be able to read it and it comes out nice and smoothly without kind of thinking about it, you know. And when you get to a longer word, you don't sort of stop and, you know, struggle with it. All these words just need to be kind of there on your tongue, don't they? And I think one place to start is with the easy stuff. So, what I've got here is I actually put it up on Facebook, on our group. So if you're not in the group yet, please join and then you can look back. So what I've got here is a link to the audio book. There's a very nice English reader who's read the whole book. And I found a PDF. There it is there, just that short little, if you cut and paste that into your address bar, you'll get that online. What I've done is I've cut and pasted that into a Word document, not the whole thing, just the first few chapters. right? So that basically we'll do a bit today, possibly a bit next week as well, and just to explore, you know, how to do it. But then it's going to be over to you to just do it as much as you can. And you know, if you're finished with this particular resource,
You mean
then
it's only on YouTube? Search the...
yeah, basically you can do this with most kids' books. You know, they're pretty. Usually, there's somebody pretty interested in reading it on YouTube, and they've done a good reading, like this guy. There's probably, look, we can see other ones. Look, there's Roald Dahl, Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG. It looks like they're all on YouTube. 3 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, you know. All you have to do is either buy the book, get it cheap at Oxfam if it's there, or find a PDF or something. And really, you've got years worth of material you can work on. Let's just listen to a bit. The twits. A twit is an idiot. If somebody says, "Oh, stop being a twit," stop being an idiot. So, what we'll do, I'll just get the sound going. We'll just listen to it and sort of follow it. And then we'll stop and actually have a read of a bit as well. Alright, here we go. Let's see how the sound's going first.
Murphy.
Just take that back because we missed the first.
The Twits by Roald Dahl. Read for you by James Murphy. Hairy faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is, how often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? Or do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hair faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things.
Have you ever wondered these things? Any hairy-faced men in the room? I mean, you're getting there, mate. A little bit. Watch out. We'll all be thinking about you. Alright, so the hairy faces. Over the page, Mr. Twit.
Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. Mr. Twit felt this hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand. But in truth, he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight, like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly, nail-brushy face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years.
Alright, pretty simple language, isn't it? Kind of typical Roald Dahl, I don't know if you find it the same, but pretty engaging, kind of funny story right from the beginning. Yeah. Now, even though it's fairly easy, that little paragraph there is kind of interesting because there are some words like the stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils. You can imagine it, can't you? There's this hair coming out of his nostrils. So that hair that comes out of his nostrils, little groups and bunches, that must be a tuft. Now do you see, because we were talking about imagery yesterday, concrete physical imagery. Because kids' stories are full of this concrete imagery, it makes it easier to guess that word, doesn't it? It's not some abstract, adult kind of language, or, you know, more possibilities, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. We've got physical descriptions, and because it's physical and concrete and sensory, strong imagery, we often find guessing is easier. So this is another reason why just reading it, not even reading it aloud, it will help you develop your vocabulary. This is how natives develop their vocabulary, of course. It's the most natural method. Further on, his face didn't grow smooth and matted, like a mat, matted. The adjective here, interesting word. It grew in spikes, could be new, spike, sharp bits. That stuck out like the bristles of a nail brush. Think of a nail brush, again physical. The bristles must be those hairs that stick up out of a brush. There you've got a new word, if you didn't know it before. The hair that sticks up out of a brush, those spikes, are bristles. Who knew the word bristle before? Right, I imagine not. But can you see how it's guessable, isn't it? If you stop and think about it, it's pretty easily guessable, very physical. I've said before, material and physical nouns and verbs, they're the basis of a language. If I said, he bristled at my criticism, all his hair came up, you know, it's like a dog, you know, when the hair comes up on the back, bristle. He bristled at my criticism. So he's getting defensive and angry, isn't he? Because the hair is sticking up. So once you know the physical word, you'll understand that metaphor. We've demonstrated this before. So just on a language vocabulary level, this stuff is really kind of useful. And remember our 95% rule? If you understand 95%, you'll guess the 5% easily. And at this level, you've still got new words, but it's probably as an average, it's around the 90-95 mark. So much better than reading more complex material where things are hard to guess. You just naturally accumulate a lot of good vocabulary this way. But you've also got this sound factor, this audio. Let's do one more little chapter, and then we'll, if we get time, we'll come back and practice reading it ourselves. But basically you've got this model of it. Is it fairly clear speech for you? I think he's a pretty clear reader. So we'll go one more chapter.
Dirty beards. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough, and there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in among the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we're careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce onto it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, and spinach and tomato ketchup, and fish fingers, and minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese, or a mouldy cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine. Because of this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth,